Again, my hair's a mess, but I don't care for now. I don't care. Um, I was watching one of the talent shows yesterday evening, and there were several drag queen acts going on, and they're entertaining, and I think they are meaning to be entertaining. However, it's a person cannot ignore the fact that that type of entertainment is a political movement in itself. Um, uh, when I watch that type of entertainment, I really don't find it offensive at all. What it does, though, is it kind of sends my mind in a twisty state whereby it's like physically pain psyche, and but again, I am a Christian who I'm not knocking those people. Again, I find it entertaining, and I find those people lovable and care aboutable. Um, and I think that there's a lot of emotional pain behind uh, all of it, and a lot of a lot of people recognize that, um and the fact of the condition, and I'm not calling drag queen cross-dressing a condition. I'm talking about the condition of the um American systems in play for so long, and how we've been taken advantage of, not not by transgenderism, not by homosexuality, not by sin, not by but by the people who are historically looking for any way they can twist and turn somebody's thinking so that they can, for the purpose of having those people in their pockets. And I don't want to overstep my boundaries and assume about some of the acts that I was watching, um, because I have a sort of feeling that there is realization, much like a non-transgendered person, a person who doesn't participate in cross-dressing and stuff like that. I have more men's clothes, but I wear, like, my children's father's shirts, if for the purpose of feeling closer to them if they're out of town or something like that. But so that's not a confession. I'm trying not to offend while um while trying to present that I am compassionate towards that population of people, because I can see and feel their pain, their emotion pain. And I've listened and watched talk shows throughout the years. And when I was younger, in my younger years, it, there's only so much that you can understand. Um, you can be compassionate, but your maturity as far as your life experience, your living experience is concerned. Like at 59 years old, I realize a lot more than I realized when I was 20. And I realize how people are used. And for the only purpose uh, of having someone in their pocket, and the people who do that, they look for any way, and I'm talking about the cartels, the drug cartels mainly right now, and sorry, but the banking system. Because again, it comes down to the same people throughout history who have been willing to do anything to get ahead or stay ahead or keep their daddy happy so they won't be left out of the will. And I mean, really, that it's all about money. And like when transgenders are younger and they're going through all that emotion, and uh, I can state my belief, um, or I want to say, I don't want to say wishes because I don't like that word. Um, I can state what I expect for my own biological children, um, who were taken from my custody, as I've talked about many times. Uh, And around the same time, there was a show on my 10-year-old or my 12-year-old, whatever it was called, wants to get a transgender operation. And I thought that is appalling because a child, I don't care who a child is, unless they're one of those facelifted people who are 40 years old trying to pass themselves off as 12. A 10, 11, 5, 6, 7, a minor age child under the age of 18 does not fully comprehend or understand their own sexuality. I don't care what anybody says. Now, if it's a practice, because I believe I am convinced 100% that transgenderism goes back to the age of the pharaohs and stuff like that. I've never seen it on any of the documentaries, but it's like an instinct. And I'm going to bring another culture into it because I was watching a documentary type movie. It was a movie, but it was like documentary type, like the way that it was the way that it was done. Um, and this particular culture, I'm not going to say it because I not in fear, but because I'm trying to keep this posting as without, I could use a little peace of mind right now. I'm tired of being attacked and having somebody's else's cross tacked to their back, tacked to my back. Excuse me. Every time I go out in public, I need for these populations of people to understand. Transgenderism isn't for me, okay, and homosexuality isn't for me. I feel as though children are more important than uh, those lifestyles allow children to be, um, within their own innocence. That's my truly how I believe. And as far as but I don't believe that transgender adults are damned to hell or children or anything like that. I don't believe that someone's automatically damned to hell because they got a transgender operation. Um, and I don't believe somebody's damned to hell because they got on a show and uh, performed a drag queen, regardless of how they lived their sexual life. Do I think that homosexuality is a sin? I do. I believe it's a sin. However, I don't believe it's a condemnation to hell. Um, and I believe that each person, if they consider themselves to be a Christian, that each person has their own calling. And if someone lives a homosexual lifestyle and they're, and they're committed to Jesus within that lifestyle, that's between them and Jesus. It's not my place. It's not my calling to judge that. In other words, my calling comes in as a mother of my own biological children and to represent other children who um, who might be being mistreated because of oxymoron or counterintuitive thinking that's used politically on purpose. Um, and to realize and understand that that's factual. That is factual. Um, and it's not something that you understand when you're young, because if you're a compassionate person, and not I'm not talking about a mercenary, but if you're a compassionate person, which I am, regardless of what anybody has said about me, just because I don't choose to live a transgender lifestyle or have a transgender operation, or I choose not to live a homosexual lifestyle and I choose to live abstinently, and it makes me angry when men who I've turned down for sexual encounters go out into the community within all their networks of people. Oh, she's a lesbian. That makes me angry because I'm not. I have children. And I believe that calling me a lesbian is whether he does that purposefully, knowing what it does to my children, like it makes them non-existent pretty much. I mean, when it comes right down to it, logistically, and I can't think of the other word that I want. Calling me a lesbian makes my children like non-existent. And I don't care, again, I don't care what anybody says. Um, if someone chooses to live a lesbian lifestyle or a homosexual male lifestyle, I know I'm crossing boundaries here, but I don't care, because my boundaries have been crossed in regard to my own biological children. Um, and it's not really a because I don't I'm not a tit for tat kind of person. Oh, I'm going to keep score either. Um, but everybody has to start stepping up and realizing and admitting that homosexuality became a political movement, and and I think at some point in time, much like anorexia, becomes a way of getting attention and drawing attention from other people who, although I don't believe that the people are damned to hell, I believe that it's a sin, and I believe that that it leads to other things. But the point of the matter is that it was politically constructed, um, and it's not something that you realize when you're young, as in, you're much more regardless of, and again, I'm thinking about my cousin and the 1970s, and the national news and the arguments about different things, um and about us being told that if we believe dinosaurs exist, we can't be Christians. It's that kind of mass media advertising and propaganda that causes us this, our heads are in a whirlwind. And I was 6 years old when I used to hear that. And I've talked to them about this before. There were like three main topics that were never ignored on the national news. Homosexuality was one. Um, uh, Nature versus nurture was another, and evolution was a third. Those three topics were never ignored on the national news when in the 70s. And yet that movement, that political movement, has drawn in other generations and convinced them that, it's a brand new thing, and they're still experiencing this horrible, and at least in my case, it wasn't, you know um I was raised in a very sort of, I had a grandmother who was very liberal, a grandmother who was very oddly conservative, because she was an abusive grandmother, my grandmother Helen, and neglectful and very deviously minded in regard to children. Um, and in the household, what I was raised under was, you could say, somewhere in between, but it wasn't, because my parents, Jean and Charlotte Henderson, were not they were not liberal people. They were neglectful and abusive of us growing up. And it's not a cross I'm willing to carry for it all. I just am not, as I lean forward and accept the cross anyway. No, I don't want. But I remember then, that was the 70s when I was a little girl. And then I remember, like, Oprah Winfrey, watching Oprah Winfrey all the time. And she had those types of topics. And I was like 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, watching Oprah Winfrey. And she um, uh, addressed those topics frequently on her talk show. So it's not something that I'm uneducated about, as far as, and then somebody comes along, you watch too much TV. Well, you know what? I really don't watch very much TV. I've watched more TV now, like on a regular basis, since simply because I'm old. I don't have the energy that I had to get up and go, and or the resources. Um, But when I was young, I didn't watch very much TV at all. And when my daughter was young, we hardly ever watched TV. We watched PBS, and then everybody comes at me with, oh, you know what that was about, and da 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 da. Well, now I know, I know that ballet and modeling, I know I've pulled the curtain back. But when I was young and my first daughter was young, I didn't realize the horrific things that go on in the entertainment industry. Um, and I sound like a broken record because those crosses keep the crosses instead of my children are like lining up, to for certain people to try to pin those crosses back to my back. And I don't want them. I don't care what anybody else has to say. I know me. Um, and no one has sat down to have a conversation with me. It's only what I've posted on my Facebook page. And when certain movements and those people who there's so much involved. But I remember watching Oprah Winfrey, and I remember watching certain interviews with transgenderism wasn't a public. It was cross-dressing homosexuality and I forget what the other thing was. But I never sat back watching those shows and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, those people are all damned to hell. No, I didn't. And I still don't believe, uh, I don't believe that way. I believe that um, the human condition has been twisted and turned in so many different directions, and the media and politics and the financial institutions and everybody who has had a stronghold on those, how money's made and everything else. um it, it is so hierarchical, and the people who have been in charge and the powers that be and all that stuff, no one has consistently brought those people to a place um of cornering those people in and for a long enough time to say, you know what, you're too old, Mr. Greenspan. I'm going to use Greenspan as a I don't want to say scapegoat, but he's one. There's a name. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been hearing the name Greenspan since I was a little girl. He's got to be 120 years old or close to it by now. Who really thinks that someone that old should hold a position regarding, or any say regarding the economy of anywhere for that long? It's a monopolization and a gridlock of everyone's minds through the generations. There's no fresh perspective uh, that that is presented for long enough for the youth to have a say in their own lives. And it makes me angry when it all comes right back, nailing it on as I lean forward again. Um, um, so as I was watching those, and as I watched the interviews, like on the Oprah Winfrey Show and Phil Donahue, um, and I remember hearing the presentations of, and the sadness that those people went through and whatnot, and the 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 men who literally said that their mothers were certain types of people and that they were trying to, or felt like at a certain point in time that they were trying to overcome, uh I don't know, competing with their mothers, or I don't know what it is, but I know that that there's a realization that a person has to come to, and a responsibility, that counterintuitive thinking is used politically on purpose. Um, and I think that some of those cross-dressing acts, my inkling is that some people have that realization at some point in time, and they decide to use what or who they thought they were, because they were confused when they were younger, as a way to um, to counteract what they realized was done to them psychologically by uh, by agents, not FBI agents, but uh, entertainment agents, modeling agents, uh, uh, um, and I believe that I know what I'm talking about here, and so, and I appreciate their struggle throughout their lifetime. Um, Not I appreciate. I don't like to say that either, because then it looks like, oh gosh, I appreciate your struggle throughout your lifetime because now I'm all good. Um, no, I want to stand with those people. I want them to understand that uh, I don't believe that we're as different uh, as like the commercial marketing system tries to make us out to be, because that's another strategy, not just with the transgender population and the non-transgender population, or the homosexual population and the non-homosexual population, but within families, within to pit you and your children against each other, um, simply by way of, one is, that I can say to my children, if they were in my custody, or I don't even like that expression, because the government and no one else they had no right to take my children from me, whatever my sins are. And I know that my children have been through a very lot of twisting and turning, and delivered think that, uh, oh, she's a Christian, so we got to take her children from her and then deliver to every culture so that her children have the opportunity to learn other cultures. No, I'm not demanding your children, uh, and I'm not mistreating your children. Uh, but I know that my children were mistreated out of care. Um, the same way I was mistreated as a child, and I think some worse. And I think there's some horrific things that go on in the foster care system. And it, it's odd that every time, like the performances that watched yesterday evening, in a very non-judgmental, from an individual standpoint, or the cross dressers, or the drag queens, which is an old terminology, I think, that I'm standing against. It's the media and the marketing. Uh, but those marketing teams uh, have prostituted the pain of pain. My pain, my anguish is prostituted, um, and bought and sold, just in the same way that the homosexual population of people was, and evidently it still is. So the responsibility comes in when you realize that marketing and everything is, and again, I was raised under the roof of Gene and Charlotte Henderson. They were masters and mistress of pitting one of us for against the other. And in this situation, I can say and bring my sisters and my brother up for the siblings I knew growing up, because they have not stood with me in the experiences that we had as children. Um, uh, and because I am praying and hoping that my message has reached my siblings. But every time that I innocently, non-judgmentally watch a show like that, it's as though not the singers or not the performers, but the media and the producers of the show and the people who have used the homosexual movement as money in their pockets since I was a child growing up, and every other, is what I'm saying. My pain has been prostituted. Uh, it's a thing of that whole. I refer back to what was said in my civics class or U.S. history class, whichever one it was, and our instructor said that war stimulates economy. And so the skirmishes are set up on a constant basis. And I particularly would rather not use war or battle or pitting people who I care about, for instance, my children, to me, it's not a way to stimulate economy. Economy can be conducted without, without the use of constant pitting one person or one against another for whatever. And so again, today, yesterday evening, I watched the show, and this morning, it's like I'm already feeling the cross coming at my back because I've been public about the way I feel um, about transgender politics, specifically right now. Transgenderism goes way back to the age of the pharaohs, and I don't feel like carrying a cross that heavy, simply because I'm a Christian and I choose not to. Um, and I'm not going to be Sheen who puts people up in battle for the purpose of their own pockets, not the performers. Are the performers making money? I imagine they are somewhere along the line, but they're only getting a percentage of what the the agents and the people who are doing the setup. I started writing a novel several years ago, and um I'm not dedicated enough to being an author to sit down and complete a novel. It's not what I want to do with my life. If my daughter came to me and said, "Hey, Ma, I got this idea to write a novel, and I've heard some of the things that you've said about having different views about the pyramids and how they were built, or how they, you know, um, I would be like, yeah, because that would be something, if she understood where I was coming from, and said, I think you have a valid point of view. Um, then I would want to co-write a novel with my daughter, or my other daughter. If And my daughter has always been a good writer. I remember from when she was in middle school. Um, um, so if my daughter said, I want you to help me write this novel, or if I had a way to contact my daughter and said, look, I always called her Angel Face. Um, I have this different point of view. I want to present it to you because I know I don't have the patience or the dedication to sit down and write a novel, but I think it's a really good, it could be a really good, coming from a different perspective as far as the pyramids and all the theories that we hear about again and again and again and again. Um, in that respect, as like a consultant of point of view. Um, but where I started with this, and I didn't want to, in case my daughter ever came to me, I don't want her to like think that I wouldn't um co-author with her, or even simply just be an administrative assistant in such an endeavor. But I started to write a novel a few years ago about uh, I can't remember how I worded it specifically, but it was like a few sentences that I had written. And I don't even know where it was like, it was based on a neighbor who I was feeling like, is there an mutual interest here, or what's going on out in 2005 here? So anyway, I started to write this novel based on what I was feeling, and then very small conversations, because he and I never sat down and had any like conversations. It was like and I looked much better at that time than I look now, and I took care of. I would have never gotten on, but these days I'm not looking for any kind of romantic interests. But when I started to write it, it was about the interaction of a woman and a female, and I based it on like this wonderment that I had about he and I, if there was some kind of. And again, keep in mind that I was still in a very naive condition of um and how I disagree now that I know how things are done. I want to change how things have been done. So I started writing about that he was waiting in the bar or something like that, and I don't go to bars as a norm. When I was young, I went to bars more regularly, obviously. Once I had got pregnant with my first daughter, I didn't go to bars, and really, even by the time I was with her father, um I I had stopped going to bars long, probably a year before, like when he and I started, if you want to use the word dating, because we really didn't go out very much. um uh so I think the setting was that my neighbor, say his name, was sitting at the bar waiting for, I can't remember if the setting was that he and I had talked about meeting at the bar or something like that. But when I was writing it, I was writing it as the setting, which became an sort of infamous bar within my personal experience, after writing, and not after writing the blurb, but during the next year or two. Even though I had only been to that bar, let's see, one, two, I think twice, three times. Across the street from that bar and up through today. I've only been to that bar three times, but it's played a much more, a very large role in my life, in my existence, just within those three visits to that bar. So I can't remember the exact setting. I think it was that I wrote that he was waiting for me, that I met, or made an arrangement to meet and whatnot. And there were three old men sitting at the bar. And the blurb that I wrote included that the three old men were taking bets as to where he and I were going to become a couple. So that was like the thing of the thing. And the three old men were much older than he and I. Um so it's interesting and one would assume questionable, but not from my own profession of innocence and naive, um, because I didn't know that that's actually the way that old men sit around and do. I didn't realize that. It's like when my first daughter's father first cheated on me, and I was devastated. I was honestly, swear to my Lord and Savior Jesus knows, I was catatonic for 3 days because I was in shock that of what Michael did to me. Um, I was shattered. I was shattered that Michael had left me at a bar with another. He left with another woman, and that night was absolutely. It was shattering to me. It shattered my psyche as an innocent person. And I was catatonic because I was that hurt and that broken. And for 3 days, I could not speak. And people laugh about that. Um, so all these years later, then I was 21 years old. And all these years later, um, now I'm 42 and I'm writing this little blurb. And in that, when I was shattered all those years ago, I was like, couldn't believe it. I couldn't, I didn't know that people actually did that kind of thing to each other. I thought that that was something that only happened in the movies, on the silver screen, in the soap operas. Honest to God. And Gene F. Henderson II just weaseled his way into my, metaphysically weaseled his way into my, um, when I said the name God, because he's familiar with the story, because that night is the night that I called him to come get me from the Dewdrop, which is 1,600 miles away. It's not the same bar, obviously. But I think that that night was the night that Gene F. Henderson II was planning on getting me as an alcoholic, because the first thing that he did was offer to me a shot of brandy or something like that to calm me down, because I was hysterically upset. Not funny, but I was completely broken and shattered. And so when I look at myself, I wonder if he had that planned the whole time, because that's how Gene F. Henderson II operates. I realize now that he was in the same way that Charlotte made phone calls to different shelters trying to keep tabs on me while not involving herself as though she were concerned, because she wasn't concerned. She just needed to know what was going on in my life. She needed to keep tabs on me without showing me the risk of my own existence. Um and Gene F. Henderson II conducted him, and he worked behind I used Jeff Cooper, who I had involvement with, and not a plan to be boyfriend and girlfriend, but um, I used to go to the gas station where he worked, and I would sit with him. It wasn't the most pleasant setting to try to, but then my younger sister Leah, when Gene F. Henderson, I remember him saying to me, I see you sitting over there I know you go there and sit with that boy, Jeff. Like, to try to make me feel some kind of way or another, because I was attempting to, he had a plan for my life and existence. And having a boyfriend was his plan for me. And that's very evident through very many of his actions that I realize now. He involved himself again in the behind the scenes of my life, manipulation of my life. And then suddenly, behind the scenes and without me knowing, my younger sister Leah picked up with Jeff Cooper. So it's that kind of thing that it just still it makes me feel nauseous to know that those people were pulling strings constantly behind my back. And then for him to weasel his goal, when I'm getting ready to say the word God, no matter what anybody else says about him. And I'm not a follower of Satan, and I don't like the fact that I know that Satan has weaseled the behind the scenes and pulled manipulation throughout my lifetime without me knowing for many years. And I know now he still does, and in a much more, as I've talked about, insidious way. Although I think that definitely and naively to come get me from the bar that Michael Johnson left me at. I think he had it planned. He may have even sat with Michael and they had something planned. Now, why Michael would have given in to him, he might have gotten hold of information about Michael that I wasn't aware of. I even remember when I was dating, or again, it wasn't really a dating situation, but when I was with Tim McAlexander, and he would pull him off to the side in the same way that he would appear at different places where I was working, and I would be like, I saw him down and at Institutional Pharmacy Services, another place, and there was 2 or 3 other places. And when I saw this interaction, I would always be like, why is he down there? And how does he even know that I'm living work or classes one time, and he's sitting at the kitchen table with the roommate who I was renting the room from, and I had no friendship association with that person. And here he is sitting at the kitchen table. I never wanted him to be a part of my life after a certain time in my life. He makes my skin crawl. and the fact that he weasels his way in, and in Charlotte the same thing, yet they've never picked up the phone. The same way as like when I first moved to Colorado in 1996, not one of my family members ever picked up a phone call and said, "Oh, happy birthday, Dawn," or "Happy Thanksgiving," or "Merry Christmas." um it's like they planned for me to be the one to talk about and be and to hold. I don't want to use the expression again. uh, um but the fact to realize that people actually do that, and that I wrote that blurb like thinking that was a completely creative blurb that I wrote out of my mind, like from my own mind, not realizing that people really actually do that kind of thing. um and thinking that Dean and Charlotte themselves were alone in the way of, because I would never think about manipulating my children's manner, like to like it for the purpose of controlling their lives and their moves and not giving them their own decision making processes, or if I don't like their decision, then I go and show up at their work and start creating some kind of storyline with whatever. I would never think of doing that. um I would never do that. I would never. Today I have a strategy, knowing my children well enough. And Jean and Charlotte can't make this claim because Jean and Charlotte never gave me my own decision making process. Because if they gave me my own decision making process, and I was able to make my own decision, like when I had to argue with Charlotte that I wanted to go buy a pickup truck, or when I was 12 and I wanted to get a haircut that was in style with my age group, and I had to argue with her, and like it was a big huge thing. There would always be repercussions, and the repercussions were that they were manipulating. Oh, well, I don't really like that. Now I'm going to need to get control of, again. And that's how they have treated me behind the scenes my entire life, up to and including present day. Um, and so when I wrote that blurb, and thinking that that was a complete um, creative uh, endeavor, and didn't realize that that's what creepy old people actually do. um it's disgusting and very upsetting. um and the effect that the way Jean and Charlotte uh were, has affected not only my life and the lives of my children, but they have ill affected everyone they've ever come in contact with. But I realize in not letting them off the I don't want to say hook, but I realize they're not the only people in their age groups that, and I'm not willing to say and let them off the hook the way that I let them hook when I was young. Because Charlotte always says, "Oh, Dawn," well, that always said, "Oh, Dawn, I was 16 years old." And that's the way things were back then. Not going to be for how they've conducted and manipulated my life. And so back to the point I was trying to make, and how, because everything always comes back to Jean and Charlotte as far as when I'm feeling manipulated, or when the masses are coming up behind me with the crosses of so many movements, and so many anything they can possibly, and to allow them to feel a level of forgiveness, from me. They come right back for the purpose of betrayal, and for the purpose with all the crosses. And I feel like in letting them do that, uh, I'm letting down the generation of my first daughter, and my second, my first son and daughter, and my daughter. And it's my calling. It's my calling according to my Lord and Savior Jesus. And everybody just wants to think that I'm just, it's all fun and games. It isn't. And as far as what I realize today, and how things are done, and what I see more clearly, and how media and marketing and all those people who are putting money in their pockets at the expenses of the psyches of the generations younger, who don't realize, they don't. My first daughter was taken from me. We had small conversations. She came to me and said, "Mom, what would you do if I told you I was a lesbian?" And I said to her, um, um, "If you choose to live your life in that lifestyle, Jen, that's your business. But if at any point you realize that it's wrong, that it's a sin, first of all, I would never turn my back on my daughter, regardless. And I would invite her girlfriend in to my home. But I said to her, if at any time you realize, or something starts to say, well, maybe this isn't right, or whatever," and I would not go out and make, moves where and that was the end of the conversation. That you need to start paying attention to your own conscience, or your own calling, because my daughter's a Christian. I know she was a Christian. I know she has a faith in Christ Jesus. Do I think that Jesus says it speaks to someone and maybe put certain people on the earth and said, you know, he uses everything, and each person has to pay attention to their own calling. Do I think that there are people who have a calling to be homosexual? I believe that to be a possibility, or uh, but it's not my calling. But I'm not saying, excuse me, but you're homosexual and you can't come into my home and I don't want you talking to my children. Da, 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 da. No, I've never said that. And I don't think that would be right for any Christian to do. However, if you're a culture that eats people, I don't want you near my children. That's a little bit more extreme and a little bit more different. And that's yet another thing. I'm trying to identify the differences where I draw the line. Or if you're a chronologically aged adult trying to influence my daughter one way or another in her sexuality at an age where she's impressionable, or if you're a chronologically aged adult, because that's taken advantage of a minor age person's psyche. And by the way, I put on my thing, no, my post right now is not for children. It says kids. I don't call children kids because children aren't sacrifices in my belief system, not any child. And the whole verse in the Bible that talks about bastards and stuff like that, I have a different take on that verse. And I can't remember what that verse is right now, so I'm not going to try to explain my interpretation. But I don't believe in in any child being called a bastard, because I believe, I almost 100% know that children are born as innocents and they're not to be sacrificed. And so to call a child a kid, and I've talked about this many times before, that's an unacceptable word to use in regard to a child. So I put that and when I talk about children, I'm talking about anybody minor age. And to me, a minor age person is a chronologically under the age of 18. So in my posting right now, I'm not trying to influence anybody's minor age child at any kind of vulnerable age. But if someone is trying, a chronologically aged adult is trying to affect or influence my minor age child's sexual identity, where I'm not present to say, my child's sexuality is her own development, and no one else has any business pulling my child to the side and trying to influence uh, my children's development in any regard. Um, and the fact of what I realize today, um, and how things are done and have always been done, um, I take a stand even more um, in regard to and against organized organized political movements. Those movements who have taken advantage of, and and said, and those people were chronologically much older than me even, and they knew that these issues have been a part of the national debate and the national news on a regular, and then to present to them when I'm not around as the bio, as though this is like some new huge thing and some new huge uh it simply it is and was and continues to be uh, um, a marketing propagandic attempt to put a wedge between us and our children, and that's not a command. Um, and from an individual standpoint, it's I don't see it as I'm shutting my door to you because you're a lesbian or because you're a transgender. No, but as a political movement, which it absolutely is. It's like gang stalking or or yeah, it's like a gang trying to gain control of the mind of a person who is less um in the know as far as politics work and how the financial situation institution uses payments, and the comprehension uh, now of what was said to me in my civics class or US history class in the ninth grade in 1979, to understand now the complete implications of that. At the time, I just thought, gosh, this just doesn't seem right, because I'm not a battle driven person. I'm not a money driven person. Um, but the only response that I had, and it wasn't a, hey, gotta raise my hand. It was a personal sort of, gosh, I don't understand that. Why would anybody want to try to make money on war? I don't understand that. Like, and it's not just making money on war. It's actually setting up the skirmishes behind the scenes. the way Jean and Charlotte did in my life and are still doing. An economy can be run without manipulating people into skirmish or into battle on a constant basis. No matter what anybody says. But if there were a political movement of drag queens and cross-dressers and transgenders who on the down low were saying, you know, we know what you're saying is true, of their political movement, which was counteracting the counterintuitive manipulation of their minds that was done to them when they were young, I would say, yeah, I'll join, but I'm not going to transgender, and I'm not going. I don't know if I would have to be a part by way of my own individual. Um, but regardless of my stand and my compassion um, for the struggles that those populations of people went through and or continue have continued to go through on an individual basis. I can honestly say that I have compassion and I care about that person very much. But I also know that there's been a lot of manipulation in regard to the twisting and turning of the minds of youth throughout the generations, and leading my children to believe that homosexuality is like this new thing that um, that the homosexual population has continued to feel all this. Are they still feeling that? I don't know very many people who have not engaged in homosexual activity, bisexuality, whatever you want to call it. I don't. I'm the only person I know who has never engaged in a sexual relationship with a same sex, with another woman. I'm the only person that I know. And I have met a lot of people. So my point is, I know that I am the minority and not part of the majority in the homosexual politics. And so what I'm saying is that I know that popularity and manipulation has played a part, money, marketing, politics plays a role in the manipulation of the psyches of of youth. And so to lead those who led my children to believe that that homosexuality or even transgenderism is some big, huge new thing. That their plight in regard to peer pressures and all that should be paid attention to more than what a heterosexual non-transgender person goes through. Because I've been through a lot. My children are everything to me. And the politics doesn't matter to me who, when I go out, tries to nail a cross to my back, or who tries to convince me otherwise, or who hates me because of my own stance in regard to the things I've talked about. Because I know it's also a political strategy. And a part of it is peer pressure put on the human condition by marketing teams and what's popular at the time and who we can make feel guilty for not participating in the latest craze. And that is, goes and I'm talking about any latest craze that comes down the pike as far as that's concerned. The goth movement, the youth were not let in on the fact of what the goth movement was all about. It wasn't about homosexuality, but there was a lot more involved in the goth movement and the whole dress of gothic. It was just a cool thing to do. And if you weren't dressing goth, then you were a nerd. I know, because the goth movement, as far as being called the goth look and all that, was when my first daughter was in middle school. That's when that trend started on its hold on the psyches of the youth. And the goth movement goes back to like Louis Comfort Tiffany, and honestly, had I realized this when my first daughter was 3 years old and we dressed in the flapper dresses, if I'd have realized what the flapper dresses were all about, I wouldn't have worn a Halloween costume and dressed my toddler, first daughter, in a flapper costume. To do with that era was one of the ugliest eras in American history, when you push the curtain back. And every time the American human condition starts to poke its head out above the darkness, and into the light, it gets smashed, and the Roaring Twenties and the behaviors of the people, the socialites, is then dumped on, or was then dumped on to the middle school age, actual middle school age youth, as in chronologically between the ages of 11 and uh, 14 or 15, but really up through their high school years. And a lot of that age group at that time carried on that look into older years. But that look is about, and was about, a lot more than what they were first drawn into that goth look, and how they were made to feel some kind of way. They were manipulated into thinking that that was cool without having all the information, just in the same way that youth and mothers, because when my first daughter was young, I thought, gosh, I think my daughter could be a model. But had I known about what the modeling industry was about, a youth is becomes a model, it never would have been a consideration in my mind. If I would have thought to myself, gosh, uh, uh-uh, my children are not going to be models or in the entertainment industry, but thank you for your compliments of my children. Um, and I would think that I'm not the only mother who feels that way once we learn um, what I know now, you know, in hindsight. And even though I thought that when I was young, when I was uh, younger, when I thought, I never, I remember looking up maybe once or twice about how to get your child a child into modeling. Um, but I didn't take it any further than, a 5 minute, I wonder how, and then thought to myself, nah, that looks like it's too long and involved. I don't have a dedication um to my children becoming models or actors or actresses. Um, I, as a mother, and that's even without all the information of what it's actually all about. Had I had the information, it would never have even been a thought in my mind to consider. Um, is my consciously took that path with their own biological children, would think that some of them in retrospect uh maybe are questioning their own decisions in such a regard. I don't know. I really can't speak for other mothers. I would like to think that I'm not the only mother who now realizes and never sought out the is such a profession for my children, past like a 30-second consideration, 5 minute at the most, when my first daughter was young. Um, And again, had I known then what I know now, I wouldn't even given it that much time in my mind. So I think I'll end what I'm saying here now. Or I'll end my journal entry. And I'll say that I have an intention to counteract the way things have been done. Because I have a need to protect my biologically right too. And I have a right to make public information that I know it was unconstitutional of the local government. Child Protective Services is an unconstitutional agency. And in my case, it was an unnecessary agency because I wasn't and still am not a neglectful mother. Nor abusive, the person who raised me.